We have a developer who's kind of done funding of a certain level. We have people from kind of government kind of organizations that do funding as well, and so kind of different range of kind of skills, and I guess not all questions will be appropriate to all of you, so I'll try and kind of direct my kind of angle. And of course, if anyone has a question, stick your hand up and we'll take those as a priority. I mean, I guess maybe as the developer, it'd be interesting to you, because we've obviously had these kind of talks and they're very detailed. There's obviously kind of a lot of kind of hoops to jump through. I don't know if you were encouraging us to go to Silicon Valley or not. We had to not run out of money and not be profitable as well, as far as I can make out. But I mean, you guys are very successful as a developer, and you've also done some funding. So maybe if we start with you, if you want to explain who you are first and the developer, and then maybe talk a bit about your funding and how you've kind of looked to do funding. Okay.
This one? No? On. It should be now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, I'm Torulf Jernström of Tribeflame, a developer over here in Finland. We started out like 5 years ago. Then we did some first bootstrapping at first, and then we raised a small amount of venture cap funding from Angel and a smaller venture cap. We're talking of hundreds of thousands of euros. Also, since we're in Finland, we obviously use these the government funding versions to increase that a bit. After that, we have been several years without, or we haven't raised more funding for the company itself, but we did raise money for one of our games, our Benji Bananas game. We got money out of Vision Plus, which invested specifically into the IP of that. And I guess we can go into further details on that if you're interested.
Well, I want to just quickly, while we've got you, because obviously you've been very successful with some of your games. So why did you want to take funding for that specific game? Because could you have funded it internally, or what was
well, we couldn't at the time, because we have been very successful with that game, and obviously we got the funding for doing that game before we had that game finished.
Okay. That's pretty good. So you kind of mentioned there's kind of the Nordic region is very well known for kind of government funding, I guess, indirect government funding. So I guess, do you want to kind of introduce yourself and say what Tekes is, and talk maybe a bit about, you do lots of things, but funding is, I guess, a fairly significant part of it for companies.
Yeah. Okay. So Tekes is the Finnish funding agency for innovation. It used to be for technology and innovation, but now it's for innovation. And we've been funding games industry since the early 2000s. I think the first game, then we talked about our video gaming, was funded in 98 actually. But now the gaming industry has really been booming. So Tekes is the government-based fund. So we finance R&D in Finland, both universities and companies' R&D projects. So, and our budget is 600 million euros annually. So, and for gaming industry, we have now launched, we have had 2 years time, Skene Games Refueled, a separate program with a budget of 70 million euros.
And in terms of how much funding can you give any one company, and from a UK point of view, it seems fairly easy to get funded, but presumably there's some clarification that you need to do to get funded.
Yeah, the purpose of Tekes is to, in a way, we work early in a seed funding phase mostly. Like we are lacking VCs in Finland, and business angels, they don't pretty much put money to gaming industry or startups, technology startups. So that's why Tekes funding is needed. So our funding can vary from feasibility studies like 30,000 euros to up to even 1 million euros. Okay. So that's a really big project. But so we come in different phases of the company, but in a seed phase it's usually 50,000 euros, 30,000 euros.
Cool. So Greg, you're kind of looking at the much wider kind of, I guess, the whole Nordic, Arctic, I don't know, is a lot going on in North Pole. But introduce yourself and what you guys do. And obviously, you're looking at much wider than games. So how do you? We've been talking about games specifically. How do you see the broader kind of funding kind of community at the moment for startups? I guess mainly tech.
Right. So I'm from ArcticStartup, and hopefully it's a familiar name for most of you out here, but we write about startup news in the Nordic and Baltic countries, and that has meant a lot of gaming news lately. And just looking big picture at the funding in the Nordics, I mean, it seems like there's more and more money coming in general when you're looking at startups in general. But we're also seeing just some crazy funding rounds going into the seed stage with these earlier stage companies there's Boom Lagoon and Next Games, and it seems like all these little spin-offs are just raising huge rounds, and they're being really hush-hush about what they're actually doing. So it seems like a new generation of Finnish fundraising right now.
Are you calling it a bubble?
I'm not calling it a bubble. I mean,
words in your mouth.
We'll talk about it, yeah.
Okay, we'll go on to the bubble later then. And I guess, Shum, we'll kind of start with, if you're going to introduce yourself, as you're the kind of only person we've not come to yet, and I mean, you have a slightly different take, more of a kind of the legal kind of side of it.
Well, not legal, actually. I run an investment bank focused on games. Recently completed a couple of transactions. What I would include also is probably alternative sources of funding. You mentioned Silicon Valley. So what certainly our firm has done is try to marry a lot of Asian larger gaming publishers making investments into European publishers. So a few weeks ago, Nexon announced an equity and publishing deal into Social Spiel, which we advised.
Okay.
And then probably more interesting for the audience here, at the end of last year, we advised Ocean View Games on a fundraising from Gameville at a seed stage as well.
Okay. So, but you guys aren't investors so much as kind of deal makers kind of thing, or can you do a bit of both?
A bit of both, yes.
Okay.
So I also have a personal investment in Ocean View and also in Social Spiel.
Okay. And I know you've done some work in the UK with Future Games of London and the
Indeed.
Ubisoft deal. So,
Yeah.
I mean, do you see the kind of Finland Nordic region as being the hot area in Europe, or is there just lots of stuff happening that we maybe just not writing about so much? I guess Germany. I don't know if you have any.
Well,
Germany seems quite hot at the moment as well.
I think that one thing certainly Finland benefits from is just two of the pioneering mobile gaming companies, Sumea and Mr. Goodliving. So I think a lot of the senior staff from those two companies have gone on to do pretty impressive things. Marcus Pasula at Grand Crew. I mean, obviously Ilkka Paninen then left after Digital Chalk had bought them and then set up Supercell. So, and obviously a lot of senior staff from Rovio are both from Sumea and Mr. Goodliving. So there is this clear heritage of mobile gaming expertise. So I think it was bound to happen.
I think maybe the one advantage of the Finnish industry is it tends to stay in Finland. I think probably the UK and US tend to move around a lot more around the world, whereas people start in Finland, they seem to stick in Finland. So I could waffle on for a while, but I guess if people have questions, I'm going to keep coming back to you in the hope that someone will have a question. You won't have to hear my questions, but so start thinking about questions. You've kind of seen the range of experts we have here. Any hands? You're all looking down at your feet. Okay, so we've been talking about kind of obviously kind of games and funding and different aspects of it. I've always been of the view that, and I guess maybe some of you have touched on this, that games are almost entirely the worst things in the world to fund, because you have games and you have games companies, and the two are not very synonymous, and most games fail. So anyone can jump in here, but I guess maybe David and Jorden, you haven't spoken yet. I mean, from a Silicon Valley point of view, do you think games are hot now, but are they really good things to fund? Because not many games are going to get to this $100 million kind of dollar stage. Maybe the kind of Kickstarters are kind of actually better for games, because certainly for smaller stage mobile games, there's a kind of like a nice mix there that we're not going to all be kings or supercells.
I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, so traditionally, if you look, Silicon Valley doesn't fund a lot of games, a lot of gaming companies, if you just look back in time. And the reason that they don't like gaming companies is really what you've been talking about, John, is that even though a VC itself is hit-driven, right? They try to find these unicorns. They don't like to invest in hit-driven types of products. So, for example, for the longest time, if you were a games company, you would go to LA, because there's more in common between games and movies, for example, than there is between a Silicon Valley company, which is going to be more technology focused, and then you're just trying to find a very broad market for it. And then, so you can think of Google or Facebook. It's not a hit, right? It's something that has staying power for a very long time, and you're just engaging a lot of people for a very long time. It's not some people for some time, and then that kind of becomes passé, and then you have to come out with something new. So you have to constantly be reinventing. What has happened, though, is with Zynga, even though Zynga, it's sort of a mixed bag, what they brought forward is this whole idea of metrics, and they really changed the entire perspective within Silicon Valley about how to look at a gaming company, and the approach that they used in terms of having tremendous amount of metrics, in terms of building a stub of a game and then using the A/B testing to take the games to the next level and build it out for the audience, and then build the monetization into the game. That, and then Kabam's model of having successful games and then reskinning them and then taking them into cross-platform. So they become much more like a machine in terms of a business. And so that has continued to make Silicon Valley investors excited about the opportunity, but you have to have some core IP. There has to be something that's there to start with, in terms of either the team is capable of producing something really important, or you're starting with something that has, like a movie, right? It's going to be some title that people know, and so you can get it started. So that would be my perspective on it.
It always strikes me in general that the reason games I've personally find them intellectually interesting is they're this combination of kind of content and technology in this kind of weird synergy, and it's very difficult to know obviously what's going to be successful, same in any industry, but it's very difficult to kind of see the combination of great technology with bad game is as bad as bad game and good technology. I mean, it's often why I kind of think why VCs shouldn't invest in games, because even though those in the industry haven't really got a clue, which I guess is why people invest in teams more. I mean, David, you were talking about the kind of where do you see the kind of crowdfunding thing going? Because it's kind of, certainly as a journalist point of view, it's kind of seen as now kind of like damaged goods, even though some games have been very successful in terms of raising money. But have you got a kind of view on where that should go? Because it does seem like a very now thing to do, and it does seem like equity funding is the next kind of obvious thing. But it sounds like you were suggesting it's going to be kind of a bit stillborn, really.
Well, I think, and as Jorden suggested a moment ago, Kickstarter and other crowdfunding sites could be the place for, where game companies really get launched, because it is difficult to make the pitch to an institutional investor or to a VC investor in many cases. And I would say, actually, and this is a bit of a divergence, but I personally am interested to see, now that we have a number of game companies that have gone public or that have achieved some, large amounts of resources through acquisitions, is it in fact the case that an operation that has a lot of money, that's well-funded, that's well-managed, perhaps global, is it in fact the case that an organization like that is going to be more likely to produce compelling games?
No.
And that's a really fundamental question, and maybe some others here have some opinions on that. Maybe they don't think it's quite so interesting a question. To me, anyway, I'm not sure that the answer to that yet has emerged. And I think when and if the answer to that comes out, and it's going to depend, I think, on what happens with companies like King, perhaps Zynga, perhaps Supercell, and others, companies with a lot of resources, and these are relatively recent phenomena. How will these companies perform relative to the small companies, which they all once were? And is this really just a total random hit-driven environment, or is it the case that you can kind of predict? There's some way to predict what companies are going to be successful and which ones aren't.
The gentleman has a question. Do you want to just say your name, maybe where you're from? Excuse me, there's a...
Hi, sorry. My name is Tyler York. I work at Grantu. Recently, I've just been talking to a number of larger publishers now, notably Rovio, a couple of others in Europe, that actually take the small studio approach in a large company. So they have like 300 people, but they're broken into teams of like 10 to 20. Do you think that that maybe can help both diversify the company and then also, and sort of like the risk of multiple products, and then also keep it small and maybe go towards that hypothesis that smaller studios are better at making compelling stories in games?
I think, probably Ilkka's maybe somewhere around, but he'd be the first one to say he's kept his team size at 130, 140 people, and he consistently wants to maintain that small company approach and maintain the small cells, within that company. And I think that's going to be his firm mantra, for the next 300 years, as he's publicly stated. So I think that certainly in Finland, a lot of the companies, maintain that small kind of very intimate team type of approach. And I think it's a great way to diversify and have different teams, working on completely different titles. If, of course, you have the DNA that is relevant for those different types of category genres of games.
Well, I'd actually love to follow up on that because it kind of ties into, so I disagree with you, by the way, that it's a bad investment field. I think there is a DNA type that really consistently produces good games. Could you, and maybe other panelists, speak to what that might be?
That's a $64 million question, or I don't know. I mean, personally, I think it's just passion. I think you got to have, real passion. Certainly, I've done a lot of personal investments, and a lot of them have failed. But certainly, when I look at, I'm sure all the panelists can add, tons to this. But team, hopefully a track record, hopefully prior experience launching games, marrying every possible function, user acquisition to marketing to analytics to metrics to launching, getting relationships with Apple, Google. I mean, there's just so many different facets of making a game successful right now. So. I mean, but ultimately, I think it just boils down to passion.
I guess that seems to be the interesting thing where I think previously you could have quite small teams who were just making a game and it went into a retail box, and there was issues around that. But now the whole games as a service thing is something that a lot of people now see as killing the... I don't really count Supercell as a small company with 130 people, but I know what you mean. But, companies now have to have... It's not just making the game, it is all these other kind of facets, and I guess that's why maybe the bigger VCs now are looking at can you do the analytics platform? Can you do the kind of user acquisition sales? I mean, you guys as I guess you're a pretty tiny developer really on a Supercell scale of things. How big are you as a?
We're about 10 people.
10 people, and you've gone through this kind of like product funding kind of thing rather than equity because.
Yeah, we've done both.
Oh, you've done both. Okay, so would you do both again in future, or is the product one? So I should explain, so the Vision Plus model is they invest in product and then they take a revenue share, is that correct?
Yes, so we made one game, or by now two, since we made a sequel. The principle was that we sold then a share of the IP of an upcoming game.
Okay.
And they don't have any stock in our company, they do not have any board of directors and no shareholders agreements and all of this stuff that we have with the investors that invested directly in our company. But they do own a share of the IP of one specific game, and then obviously on the follow-ups on that one, because it would be really stupid of them not to not to demand those follow-up sequel rights. And it's been working out great for both of us. The game has been doing great with some 40 to 50 million downloads by now, and we're at the sequel, and we have like sodas and candy, and we're taking that to multiple markets by now. So it works great, at least in our case, and it's a lot more lightweight than getting someone to own shares in your company, and we are a lot more free with our other ideas.
I guess the balance is, one, it's not going to be the $100 million revenue stream or the $1 billion company from one game.
Well, it is if the game happens to be Angry Birds or Clash of Clans.
Yeah, but I guess the other thing is, funding-wise, a lot of people take on funding not necessarily for the money. When I talk to people who've raised vast sums of money, they always go, "Oh, we didn't need it, but we wanted this guy on the board. We wanted access to those VCs." So I guess funding is more than just. I think sometimes we look at funding, we go, "It's about money," and actually, in most cases, it is about money, but there are lots of other things packaged onto it.
Yeah, they certainly helped us get in contact with publishers, with a lot of this merchandising stuff. I mean, one of our investors is Tero Ojanperä, who used to be the CTO of Nokia, and he certainly has a lot of contacts. That helps.
So, Greg, looking at I'm using you as the kind of the wider kind of litmus paper of games and everything else. I mean, I won't put the word bubble in your mouth again, but I mean, do you see the kind of funding that early stage games companies are having in this region to be disproportionate because it's such a hot market at the moment compared to, say, medical companies or wearable tech companies? Or
Well, it is very hot, and it's also kind of like what we've been talking about is like it all comes down to the team. And I think right now there's been so much kind of like knowledge churning that a lot of great teams are spitting out of like Rovio and Supercell and these other gaming companies, which has been happening in the past and in the past. So, but it seems like right now I'm kind of cracking up every press release that I get that's in the few millions. It's kind of some new game company I haven't really heard of, and they're like from they're from Supercell or they're from Rovio, and they're building a character-driven, free-to-play iPad-first game. And I'm like, well, of course it's like in the millions here. I don't know. It just kind of, I don't know if it's irrational because, I mean, obviously there are a lot, like the Nordics seem to be hit makers right now. But at the same time, it is kind of like, okay, this is a new era, at least for what I'm seeing.
I mean, I guess, so I get press releases about games all the time. You probably get press releases about funding rounds all the time. So a bit off the subject, but what press release about funding is now exciting to you? Because obviously everyone's raising a couple of million quid to do something, but is there anything particularly that
when it comes
is the interesting thing for you?
Well, I think writing funding stories is a little bit boring, a little bit repetitive. You can kind of be like, this happened because of this and this. But when it's like these kind of out of nowhere companies raising a couple million, you're kind of like, what's going on here? Because you're asking them like, okay, what's your first game about, or what's the IP? And they're like, oh, it's character driven, like. Yeah. So
I've had those interviews.
Yeah, you're like, come on, well, I don't know, that gets me interested at least. That makes me want to follow a company. Okay. And then also like the crowdfunding rounds as well, like that kind of shows that there's already some sort of traction, that grassroots kind of, excitement around a game that's pretty exciting to write about or to be a part of too. So,
okay. Yeah. So, I've not asked you many questions. So obviously, this is the kind of the game side. I'm talking about kind of established companies who are kind of refreshing people and doing startups. But you guys do kind of student funding as well, or how established does a company have to be to get kind of funding? With you, is it just a good idea? And
I think we can finance companies that are in different phases. Like usually we discuss with the companies, then they come to discuss to us that they have only the idea. So it's a different kind of companies.
And do you take equity in the companies, or how do you structure your deals? Okay, so
we don't take we take no equity. And now when we are starting this venture funding, so we are funding only funds, so targeting our funding to the funds and not make any direct investments, but we don't take any equity.
Do you get money back? Do you get any money back?
Yeah, it's more jobs, and then the effect on the total economy. So for us, gaming companies have been the easiest one because we launched a program in early 2000 for the software industry, and the gaming companies was really the most hottest one, and the companies that really were booming the whole total industry, and we got most of the projects from gaming companies, and that's why we have now launched the separate gaming program that's only dedicated for gaming. So gaming has always been the easiest one because the companies they're very innovative, they have this passion, they always want to do something new, and they want to grow. So they want to make something big, and that's not the case when you look at the companies in a total. So
the games companies in Finland are the ones with the ambition. That's kind of good to know.
Yeah.
So kind of coming to the end, I'm sure your stomachs are rumbling. Do we have anyone else with burning issues? Someone just picking their nose, I think. Is that a hand? No, just picking their nose. Okay, so we're kind of wrapping up. I'll give everyone a chance to kind of sum up. So I guess you all have different kind of companies, but is there any kind of trends you see from your kind of personal kind of line of work? What do you see for the next kind of 6 months will be something like a takeaway that people can that's a surprising trend?
For me, it's
Yeah, you start.
that's. I'm going to pass this on. Why don't
No,
you
you
start?
can't pass it on. Everyone has to answer. Come on.
Well, I don't know. I think in the next few months, like I'm really excited to see what's going to happen with Supernauts by Grand Crew, and if they can get a huge worldwide release where we can get like 3 top games in there, like from Finland, you know, with Rovio, with Supercell, with now Grand Crew. That's gonna be really exciting to see. So that's what I'm excited about.
Cool.
I would say we're obviously on mobile app store, Google Play. That market has stabilized a lot in the last few years, as you likely know. I think it's going to be interesting to see, for instance, all of these companies that you've been talking about raising these multi-million-dollar rounds. Once they start getting out their games, like for instance Grand Crew and so forth, are they able to break into this currently very stable top chart?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I think what has been pretty clear in the investor circles is that there's been a real maturing of the gamer. And so at the very beginning, if you go back 3-4 years when there was this huge expansion of the amount of gamers because of social gaming, people were just clicking on something. They weren't really playing a game, right? They're just clicking on something that seemed to be fun, and then there's some reward. Well, that gamer is learning how to become much more engaged with what they're playing, and they're looking for more engagement. And so there has been this move to mid-core, and the mid-core and the hardcore players monetize a lot better. And there's a lot more engagement that you can do in terms of story and in terms of the art, and so there's a real motion towards making the whole gaming market that is this mid-core and hardcore market much larger than it was before. So I think that's pretty exciting from the point of view of the investors.
I think it comes back to what you said, the Zynga analytics. Now we get this horrible word segmentation. I think segmentation is something that a lot of people are looking precisely where to place their games.
Right.
The good news is that every forecast you read from pretty much every independent research analyst out there indicates mobile gaming just continuing to grow at fantastic rates.
If they're all saying that, it's probably going to flop, isn't it?
Well, I mean, given that, that's great for the industry in general. However, I think that some of the panelists already alluded to the fact that you are seeing a sort of barrier to entry to enter into the top 300-400 grossing charts, whether it's Apple or Android. So the indie hits are going to get a lot rarer. And so I think there will be a flight to quality, and you will have investors who only will support or invest teams who have tons of experience, track records, who have published top grossing titles. So you will see this change, certainly.
I think the next 6 months we're going to see some real development in the area of equity crowdfunding, both in the U.S. The SEC has to release the regulations in the next 6 months, and also in Europe, where we're seeing a real move to unify and create a pan-European model for equity crowdfunding.
Good one.
I think more greater games for tablets and all this. I think we will see this in the console gaming. It's very difficult to enter the market, but for tablets, when you are developing these core games and more like photorealistic images and 3D, all this kind of stuff. So there will be more Finnish players on that playground as well.
Good.
And then so I think the mobile is the future. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much for the panelists. We'll give them a big round of applause and then off to lunch.